Every story you hear is recorded by me in my own voice for hours at a time. No AI narration, just dedication and a love for great stories. If you appreciate that, hit subscribe. I've investigated haunted forests, abandoned towns, cursed rivers, and forgotten American folklore legends. But there was something about the story of the Screaming Bridge of Alabama that felt different from very beginning. Maybe it was because nobody could agree on how the tragedy happened. Maybe it was because every version of the story ended with the same terrifying detail, the scream. I first heard about the bridge while traveling through a remote part of Alabama. It wasn't marked as a tourist destination. There were no signs celebrating its history. In fact, many locals seemed uncomfortable discussing it at all. Whenever I mentioned the bridge, people either changed the subject or warned me not to visit after dark. Of course, that only made me more curious. According to local legend, decades ago, a terrible tragedy occurred on the bridge. Some stories claimed a young woman lost control of her car during a violent storm and plunged into the river below. Other versions spoke of a mother desperately searching for her missing child before meeting a tragic fate herself. The details changed depending on who was telling the story, but one thing never changed. Witnesses claimed that on certain nights, especially when fog covered the river and the wind died away, an agonizing scream could be heard echoing from the bridge. Not a distant animal, not the sound of metal or machinery, a human scream, a scream filled with fear, grief, and desperation. Many people believed it was the spirit of someone who died there. Others claimed the bridge itself was cursed. As a storyteller and investigator of unexplained mysteries, I knew I had to see it for myself. So just before sunset, I drove toward the old bridge. The structure looked ordinary enough during daylight. Rusted steel beams stretched across a slow-moving river, and thick Alabama woods surrounded both sides. But even before darkness arrived, something about the place felt wrong. The air seemed unusually cold, the birds had gone silent, and the closer I got to the center of the bridge, the stronger the feeling became that I was walking into a story that didn't want to be told. I decided to spend the entire night at the bridge. By midnight, a thick fog had settled over the river below. The moon occasionally appeared through the clouds, casting pale light across the rusted structure. Every sound seemed amplified in the darkness: the creak of metal, the movement of water beneath the bridge, the distant rustling of leaves. I stood near the center of the bridge, recording audio and taking notes. For hours, nothing happened. Then, at exactly 2:17 a.m., the atmosphere changed. The temperature dropped suddenly. A cold wind swept across the bridge, and then I heard it. A scream. The sound erupted from somewhere beneath me. It was not faint, it was not distant. It sounded horrifyingly close. Every muscle in my body froze. The scream lasted only a few seconds, but it felt much longer. It wasn't the cry of an animal, it wasn't a mechanical noise. It sounded unmistakably human, and it carried an overwhelming sense of panic. I rushed toward the railing and shined my flashlight into the darkness below. Nothing. Just fog drifting over the river. Then I noticed movement. A pale figure standing near the edge of the riverbank. At first I assumed it was another visitor, but the figure wasn't moving. It simply stood there, watching. The beam of my flashlight flickered. For one brief moment, the figure appeared perfectly clear. A woman dressed in old-fashioned clothing. Her face was impossible to see. Then the light stabilized and she was gone. The riverbank was empty. Yet somewhere in the darkness, I thought I could still hear the echo of that scream. The following day, I began digging deeper into the history of the bridge. What I discovered was both fascinating and unsettling. Over the years, dozens of witnesses had reported hearing unexplained screams at nearly the same location. Some described seeing a woman near the bridge shortly before the sound occurred. Others claimed they had captured strange audio recordings containing voices that weren't present during filming. I listened to several of those recordings myself. Most contained nothing unusual, but a few were difficult to explain. One recording captured a faint cry despite there being no one nearby at the time. Another contained what sounded like a woman whispering before a sudden burst of static interrupted the audio. Skeptics argue that the screams are caused by unusual acoustics, wildlife, or the power of suggestion, and perhaps there is truth in those explanations, but they don't explain everything. They don't explain why generations of witnesses continue reporting the same experience. They don't explain the sightings, and they certainly don't explain what I saw standing beside the river that night. To this day, the Screaming Bridge remains one of Alabama's most enduring paranormal legends. Some believe it is haunted by the spirit of a tragic victim. Others believe the bridge itself has become a focal point for unexplained supernatural activity. As for me, I can only tell you what happened. I heard the scream. I saw the figure. And when I left the bridge just before sunrise, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been watching me from the darkness. Even now, years later, whenever I hear the distant sound of wind moving across the old bridge, I think about that night in Alabama, and I wonder if the scream is still echoing there, waiting for the next traveler brave enough to listen. Subscribe, because your subscription matters a lot.